Hello and welcome to my tutorial. Mr.net is here. Today I'm going to explain the chain of responsibility pattern. We use this pattern when we want that an object or a class will be processed by another object and we don't know which object is the object which handles the request. So if we look into the UML diagram, we have here an abstract class, and this abstract class offers two methods. One method is the setHandler method, which takes an argument from type handler, and we need this method to set inside our subclasses the private field handler. This is because when a client invoke handler 1 to handle the request and this handler can't handle the request, he delegate the request to the next handler. So for example, the client invoke handler 1, he called the method handle request. This handler can't handle this request, so he delegate the argument to the next handler, which could be, for example, the handler 2, and so on. So now if you look into the source code, first what I have to do is to implement an abstract class. Abstract class. I call it the handler, and this handler provides a void method which is also abstract, public abstract void, and this method is called setHandler, which takes an handler as argument. So the abstract method has to be implemented by the subclasses because it is here abstract, and then I use a public virtual void handle request. As an argument I take an object, and the virtual keyword tells me that a subclass has the possibility to override this method, and when the subclass does not override this method and the client call on a subclass this method, I automatically invoke this method here in the base class, and in this method I write to the console the request cannot be handled. So then I implement a class. I call it the handler underline 1, and this handler inherits from this class, from the handler class. And we see I have to implement the setHandler method. The other method is an option. So I copy this class and I also create a handler 2. The handler, what we get through the setHandler method, I set here a private field with type handler with the name underline handler. We need this field because if a handler can't handle the request, we have to delegate the request on the next handler in the chain. But I explain it later. So in this method I say underline handler is handler. Now I copy this method and the field here and use it in my handler2 class. Then I have here my handle request method. I say public override handle request, and in this method I try to handle the request. For example, I ask if the type of my argument is the type of system.string, then I say console.writeLine the argument is from type string. And if I cannot handle the request because it isn't a type of string, I have to delegate the request to the next handler in the chain. So I say handler dot handle request. We see this field here is from type handler, and the handler implements the method handler request. So I call on my handler request and delegate the argument to the next handler. But the point is, the handler here can be null. So I ask if my handler is not null, I delegate the request to the handler. If the handler is null, because I does not set a handler with this method, I invoke the handler dot handle request. I invoke the method from my base class, which is this method here. And also my second handler has a handle request method, so I copy this and use it here, and inside this method I ask if the type is from type integer 32, and if the object is from type integer, I can handle the request and I say the argument is from type integer. Otherwise, I delegate the request to the next handler. So that's my object for the chain of responsibility. Now I show it in the source code, in the console program. I say I instantiate a handler1, and I also instantiate a handler2. And for example, I call from my handler1 the handle request method and say this is my argument, and this argument is from type string, and then I call from the handler1 the handler request with the type integer. So now I start the program, and we see after the hello world here, the argument is from type string. So the handler1 here can handle the request, and I get the argument is from type string. The second argument here is from type integer, and the handler1 cannot handle it. So I try to call to delegate the request to my next handler. The next handler in this case is null, so I call the handle request method from my base class. This is this method here, and this method tells me the request cannot be handled. And I also can say, and that's an advantage of this pattern, I can say handler1 set handler, and the next handler in the chain after the handler 1 is the handler number 2. So now if I call the program, we see the argument is from type string, that's this first argument here, and the second argument, the argument is from type integer. That's the method from the handle 2 object here, which can handle integer types. I can also here say handler 1 handle request, and I use as an argument the type float. So I restart the program, and we see the argument is from type string. That's the first argument. The second argument, the argument is from type integer, and the last argument from type float tells me the request cannot be handled. That's obviously this method here, the request cannot be handled. This is because the handler number 2 hasn't a next object in his chain, so he delegates it to the base class, and the base class handle all requests which I can't handle. So that's the chain of responsibility pattern. I hope I explained it well for you. If you like it, please subscribe my channel or give me a feedback so I can improve my videos for you, and hopefully I see you in the next video, and bye.